Hi, I'm Sharon Richardson, and this is a really brief introduction to some of the risks that can be introduced with generative AI tools. The tools we're talking about really are AI assistants. We're not going to go into the more advanced use cases of agents and agentic workflows. It's when we're using a large language model to help generate content. And a disclaimer too, this is very much based on the models and the architectures as they are in October 2025. This is still a rapidly moving field, and so things may change if you're watching this from the future. But to remind about how this actually works, when we're using AI assistants, generative AI tools, we provide some form of free text instruction. We can, if we want, provide additional context. Combined, that forms a prompt that goes into the large language model, which will then complete a human-readable response based on that prompt. And this can iterate. There's more complications, but that's it and in a nutshell. We call it generative AI because they generate open-ended outputs. We don't have absolute control over the type, the format, the size, what it produces, and there is only some probability of being correct. Adding context can improve that probability, but it never guarantees accuracy. Whenever we use these tools, we introduce risk. Now, there was this article last year in Harvard Business Review Online that talked about the 4 types of generative AI risk and how to mitigate them. I think it's an excellent framing, particularly for people who are new and just still getting familiar with how to use AI assistants at work. First is misuse, risking data leakage by sharing confidential data with insecure services. Consumer-grade tools have very little security protections. Any prompts, any content that you put into them almost certainly will be used to help train future models. Enterprise versions of those tools typically come with guarantees and security settings to prevent that from happening. But these tools are really young and immature, and often the consumer and the enterprise versions of the same tool look identical. So it's really important to make sure that you are logged into the correct service when you're using an AI assistant with your work data. Misapplication is where you damage credibility by using plausible but inaccurately generated content. This is often being referred to as hallucinations. And it's back to the fact that every output only has some probability of being correct. There's no guarantee. Back in 2023, barely 6 months after ChatGPT had been released, there was news headlines around a lawyer using ChatGPT in court and citing fake cases. But 2 years later, it's still happening. So people clearly aren't understanding that the content cannot always be trusted. I always use an example where I will get ChatGPT to create a very authentic looking report and then ask the question, can you provide citations for all the claims you just made in those answers? And here's one response. That's an excellent and very fair request. We're having polite ChatGPT today. The answers I drafted were not factual claims about completed projects. They were written as illustrative examples. Well, that's great, but nothing indicated that in the previous response that was generated. If I'd been careless or had been in a rush, I might have sent something straight out the door containing those dreaded hallucinations. It's really important to challenge any fact-based claims. Verify everything. Somewhat linked to this is misrepresentation, where you lose trust because you simply fail to declare that you're including content generated or modified by AI. And actually, Deloitte recently this year suffered both misapplication and misrepresentation in one go. They produced a report for government, they received quite a lot of money for it, and it had completely fabricated citations. But they didn't find them. An independent researcher found them and published them. It's really important to disclose when you delegate to an AI, and you're still responsible for any errors. I will often use ChatGPT to summarise notes I've taken to just get them into a nice, concise format. And I will often start with the following has been summarised by ChatGPT. There is no harm in that. They're still my notes. And then the fourth one is misadventure, which is where you fail to realise that content is inauthentic, and we often call this deep fakes, and that they're being deliberately used in fraudulent activities. Arup fell victim to this sort of scam last year. They will not be the last. The recommendation I give to everybody as they're learning and getting to grips with these tools is be cautious, be critical, and if in doubt, always seek additional verification before acting. That's it. Really brief introduction, but I think it's a good framing, particularly for those who are just getting familiar with using these tools to help with content generation in the workplace. Thanks for listening.